All right. Welcome, everybody. We have got Scott Margolius here from Ecomsellertools.com. Scott deals with people who've gotten in trouble with Amazon. He deals with things like IP complaints. He deals with legal issues that people might run into. He deals with Amazon asking you for proof of authenticity, all of that stuff. So we wanted to bring him on because I know a lot of you guys have been dealing with, like, how do I write a plan of action, or how do I respond to this IP claim that Amazon sent me from a company. So we wanted to bring in Scott so that he could sort of talk to us about that. Now, before we really jump into this, I do want to preface this with every situation is different, and there's not like a perfect cookie cutter email or template that's always going to work in 100% of your situations. So that's why we wanted to bring in Scott so we could sort of teach you the theory and the methods, and then you can use those to formulate your own plan of actions or your own templates. And then if things don't work, then maybe you can go and hire someone like Scott at ecomsellertools.com. All right, Scott, take it away, man.
So I really like the way that you've introduced the way that you think about these types of complaints. And it's so important to note it's a mentality that you have to keep in mind, right? Because every situation is different. And I know that it's easy to look for the path of least resistance, to be tempted to take a template that, hey, somebody says that this has worked for me, and hey, you're asking them for the template, and it's so easy to want to try to apply that to your situation to make it fit, and most of the time that's a huge mistake. And I can see how in the back of your mind you might be thinking, oh, well, this guy does this for a living, so if I give you a template, then you can just use that and you won't need me. And that's, actually the furthest thing from the way it actually works. Yeah. Right? Because I want to help you only if you need help, and I don't want to try to hinder you from needing help just so I don't get the opportunity to help you. I want to help you. The ultimate goal is just like it should be for you, to serve the customer, right? The customer, you take care of them and everything else goes well. It's somewhat difficult to do that on Amazon because Amazon restricts you from having the communication with the customer that you might want to have. A lot of the time people are really happy. It's like, hey, I don't want to have to deal with customers. That's why I'm FBA. And if you get a call or a message or whatever, it's like, hey, we're going to shove this off to FBA so you don't have to deal with it. And I think a lot of the time that's a mistake. In fact, I've had a couple of clients get a hold of me in the last week or two, and I'm sorry, not clients, but customers. And they're like, hey, I need help with this. I had a guy call me yesterday who said that he had another Amazon seller tell him to look me up and call me to get help with a product that this other seller was selling. It's like, this is super confusing. I'm like, where did you get my number? And it didn't make any sense at the time, but I said, well, here, let me help you out. I'm going to give you a couple of different numbers that you can call to get possible support from Amazon. And thankfully, this buyer was super understanding. He buys a lot of stuff on Amazon, so he wasn't just a troublemaker, trying to cause problems. He was just like, where's my part? My car part. I needed to go on this trip, and so it didn't make any sense to him why he wasn't getting it. But the key is provide support to the customer. I knew immediately this isn't my customer, but they need help. So if they get a hold of you, you should do everything you can to help them instead of sending them off to Amazon to get help. I had that happen with another customer who got a hold of me, and he's like, where's my item? Where's my item? Where's my item? And instead of telling him, well, there's no way to track this. It's in the hands of the shipping carrier, and I can't help you. There's nothing I can do. Actually, he was getting to the point of, hey, give me a refund. And I said, well, let's wait until Tuesday and see if you get it or not. And if you don't, then, we could go ahead and reimburse you and cancel the shipment, and maybe you could be able to order it from somebody else. But I knew going into Labor Day weekend, he's not going to be able to get this from anybody else any sooner, right? I'm probably one of the few people who had that particular item in stock. And so trying to provide the very best service for him, I wanted to take care of that for him. Maybe the carrier comes through and delivers it, right?
Exactly.
But taking care of the customer will prevent a lot of these back end problems that you deal with on Amazon, right?
Yeah,
If you
absolutely.
send them to Amazon, they're gonna, the agent's gonna file an A to Z claim, which is gonna affect your ODR,
Uh-huh.
or any number of other things. It's just gonna cause further frustration for the buyer. And Amazon's default is we're gonna provide a refund, but that doesn't necessarily help the buyer achieve what they're looking to achieve. They don't want a refund, they want the product. Or
Uh-huh.
they want a replacement. Amazon's not going to provide a replacement, but you could bend over backwards and provide a replacement. And sometimes that's a mistake. Sometimes it makes sense.
Hmm.
It just depends. In the thing is that every situation is different,
Yeah.
and every cause of every problem is different. And so every plan of action is different, and every response to an IP complaint is different. And so using a template is only valuable in so much as it helps you understand the framework under which you should be trying to think through what your response
Yep.
should look like.
Absolutely. Hmm.
So it really is, it's mentality, right?
Hmm.
You can't copy off of somebody else's homework.
Yep.
The
Absolutely.
professor, the teacher, they want to see that you've submitted your own work. And in fact, I think that there's a high likelihood that Amazon agents in seller performance have software that they use to analyze plans of action to determine what is the percentage of same
Uh-huh. Just like a
phrases.
professor
And
would check for plagiarism. Yep.
exactly, I think that they're probably using tools like that.
Yeah,
And
I 100%
so
agree.
if you submit something that's too similar to what somebody else has submitted, it might get rejected immediately just because of that.
Hmm.
um, and the fact is, whatever caused the problem that Amazon alerted you about, almost always it's driven by customer complaint. And so it becomes your job to figure out, well, what did they complain about and why? Because in order to write an effective plan of action, you've got to address that root cause. You've got to uncover what it is to
Hmm.
even be able to write something that's effective, to be able to say that we've figured it out, we've resolved it, and this is what we're going to do to prevent it, and this is why it will no longer happen again. Those are the key aspects of any plan of action.
Yep.
It all starts with determining root cause. There are maybe 5 different places in your account where you could go to figure out what that is. And 80% of the time, you're going to see the complaint, or it's going to be attached as a message in your account, driven by or associated with a refund.
Hmm.
So that's for the most part. If it's FBA, you'd want to go into, at the top of your screen in Seller Central, you'd want to go to reports, and then when you pull that down, you go about 3/4 of the page down on the left, and you'll see I can't remember, it's fulfillment, customer concessions,
Uh-huh.
FBA customer returns. Then that allows you to put in the ASIN that you've been notified about and put in a date range. And so if you receive the complaint from Amazon on September 1st, you'd want to put in a date range of, say, August 15th through September 1st, to catch any of the refunds that show up in that time period for that ASIN.
Hmm.
Normally, they'll then say what the specific complaint responses were, and any of the ones that are in blue, they're hot linked, and so you could go into that and see specifically what the buyer said.
Yep.
Sometimes it'll show up in other places. It'll show up in voice of the customer. It might show up in your feedback. It might show up in buyer seller messaging. It could show up in a review for the product itself, as a product review. There are various different places where a complaint can show up, but most of the performance notifications you receive will be driven by some kind of buyer complaint.
Hmm.
And sometimes I was dealing with one this morning where it was one ASIN with different complaints that caused 2 different performance notifications for the same ASIN,
Ah.
showed up like a couple days apart. And so you'd want to address all of those things at the same time, as opposed to 2 separate plans of action.
Yes.
One thing to keep in mind is, if you get notified, don't ever ask Amazon what the problem was. Don't call seller support. Don't write to seller performance. They're not going to tell you. You're not going to be able to get a hold of anybody at seller performance. Nobody's going to answer and tell you what the problem was. They're not going to explain that this was the cause of the inauthentic complaint. So they expect you to figure that out on your own. And if you need help doing that beyond the areas of the account that I mentioned, you should get help instead of trying to get help from Amazon. Now, in some cases, after you've gone through, you've created your plan of action. And by the way, I don't mind reviewing them. Like, let's say, Nathan, you had a complaint for an ASIN, and you weren't quite sure that you got it all right. But you went ahead and you went through all those steps that you thought you should go through, and you drafted your plan, and you're getting ready to submit it. I wouldn't mind, reviewing that for you, and maybe I could do it in 15 minutes or whatever. But if I edit it, it's probably an hour. I mean, we can. I don't have to charge you for a full plan of action. I could just charge you for that hour of reviewing and editing, because you've already done a lot of the work, presumably, on your own. Of course, I'm going to be able to look at that and see, did you answer all the right questions and address everything in the right way? And typically, if you wanted to do that, what I would need is the original notice of suspension for that ASIN, and I would need your plan of action. And putting those two things together, I could determine whether or not what you put together is sufficient. And that can be a really good way to go. It's only, and maybe let's call it an hour, or it could be less than that. And that gives you a bite-sized way to jump in if you want to do a lot of this work on your own, but you're afraid to pull the trigger. I think that's fully appropriate, right? Up until the point where you have the confidence to be able to submit that. But let's pretend you went ahead and submitted it either on your own or with help from a professional. You would then have the ability to call Account Health or have Account Health call you. There are a couple of different links that you can go to initiate that through Contact Us, or a couple of different areas like that on your account, where you can have Account Health call you about the plan of action that you've submitted, and you can get them to review it. And that can be helpful. You might not get all the right information you need on the first attempt. You might have to try 3 times or 5 times or even 10 times to get somebody who is truly helpful.
I think one of our mods in the group, when they were first starting, they were doing that. It took them 32 tries before they got someone.
Wow. God.
Props to them for just trying. It was Nicole. Props to them for just trying over and over and over. They tried so many times, but eventually got through.
Well, I mean, that is one of the kind of tricks, right? The dirty little secret is you might not get very good help the first time or the third time or whatever. But it's important to be persistent, but pleasantly persistent, right? If you're persistent in an unpleasant way, that's not going to be beneficial, right? But if you're persistent in a just kind of being patient, but pressing through until you get an answer, you can do that in a way that's congenial and helpful and doesn't cause anybody that you're talking to get stressed out. It's just, hey, I really need help with this, and I can't see what all the same things are. If I'm talking to a rep, I can't see all the same things that you see. You have access to different parts of my account behind the scenes that I don't know what's going on, but I'm wondering if maybe you can review this situation. You're on the phone talking to them, appealing to them, to their desire to help you. I mean, they want to help. That doesn't necessarily mean that the help that they provide is going to be what it needs to be. They're to some degree their hands are tied, and another degree they don't necessarily know what the answer is, but at least they are reviewing these types of things, these plans of action that people submit on a regular basis, and they can give you an idea if maybe you're missing something, or if there's something that is on the back end of your account that you can't see, that they can tell you, oh, your invoices have not been accepted. We received your plan of action, but your invoices have been rejected. There's a whole nother series of things that you've got to keep in mind in terms of the way that your invoice or your receipt needs to be annotated in order, or the information that needs to be on there in order for Amazon to accept that, right? And so I've seen a lot of accounts that either the ASIN or the account itself stays suspended, and they might never get their account back, they might never get their ASIN back, simply because the invoice or the receipt has not been accepted, or it's been rejected, or they never received it. A lot of the time, that's something that you can work with account help to fix, right? But in order to do that, it's got to be in the right format first. You've got to have
Exactly.
that invoice or receipt. You've got to have it annotated properly. I like to take whatever I've got and either print it off or take a picture of it and then print it off, so that I can annotate by hand on the
Yes.
invoice. You don't want the invoice or receipt to look like it's been electronically altered in any
Yes.
way. So I know that there are other people who certainly have been successful at highlighting that, using something like, Photoshop or whatever. I just don't recommend it, because to me, it's one additional variable that can, you don't know if that's preventing them from accepting your invoice, because they look at that and think, oh, this has been digitally altered.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they have tools that can tell if something was digitally changed,
Oh,
as
for
opposed
sure,
to a
for
photo
sure.
of something that's been highlighted. It's a completely
Absolutely.
different
They are
file.
looking at that with tools. And so you don't want to give any sort of indication that it could be a false positive, for
Exactly.
instance. Because it's so easy to manipulate an invoice, and honestly, you never, ever, 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 ever want to do it.
Yeah.
I also offer ungating services for brands and for categories, and we've been doing that since 2014. We have never caused an account to be suspended, right? Nobody's ever come to us looking for ungating and come away with their account suspended because they came to us for help. We're offering services that fall into, I would call, consulting, but we walk you through the whole way. We end up getting you a relationship with a supplier, manufacturer, distributor, where you have a real and genuine invoice because you ordered real product. And then that's part of, one of the, let's say, three legs of the stool to get that whole process completed where you can get ungated. There are other services that provide invoices that are not real invoices, and that causes account suspensions. But you could just as easily cause a suspension on your own account through manipulating an invoice. And I've run into people who've done that before. It's like, well, Amazon asked me for an invoice, but I don't have one, so I made one up. Well, don't do that. That's a huge, huge, huge mistake. There are other ways to address that type of issue. So even if you have invoices or you have receipts, but you can't find one, don't make one up.
Yes. 100%.
They're just, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I know, Scott, like in our group, we've got a lot of people who will get inauthentic claims, but then also intellectual property claims or IP claims. And they are a little bit different, but could we sort of break down, like, specifically what is Amazon looking for? Like, how should someone, let's say I'm writing a response to like an IP claim where Amazon says this company, and they'll usually like give you the contact info for the company, but they'll say this company is claiming that you're stealing their intellectual property, blah, 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 blah. We've shut down this ASIN. You can respond here. What is Amazon looking for? How should I as a seller battle that, or how should I formulate my response to that?
Sure. So let's talk about a couple of the ways that they're similar. They both need a reply. Most performance notifications, unless they specifically say that no reply is necessary, in every other case, even if they don't say that they need a reply, they usually do. If you don't reply to performance notifications, especially for inauthentic or IP complaints or copyright or anything along those lines, not as described, used, sold as new, any kind of complaint like that about product condition or authenticity, it requires a response. You actually need to submit a plan of action. Even if it doesn't say, oh, you need to submit a plan of action, you need to do it, or that's going to tee your account up for potential suspension. It's really unfortunate that they don't have any sort of language that tells you that this requires a response. Most people don't know that it does require a response until they get suspended for not responding. So that's one thing.
Or even we see it almost like the seatbelt law sometimes. Like, maybe it's okay for now, but then you get in trouble for something else, and then they sort of tie it on like, oh, and by the way, you never responded to that, so now we're just kicking you off.
Yeah, it is like that. but what that really tells you is that it requires a response.
Exactly.
You should have responded sooner. You just didn't realize that you needed to.
Yeah.
A lot of the time anymore, they give you a time frame for the response. You know, they'll say, oh, we need to hear back from you within 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours or whatever. And you definitely want to respond within that period of time. But both of those issues require a response. And to me, plans of action for everything that is not an IP complaint are a whole lot more straightforward. And to give you an idea, almost all of the plans of action that I've ever written have been 2 pages or less. So, you know, whether it's a page or it's a page and a half, 2 pages, whatever, that's what I'm shooting for when I write a plan of action for anything that's not an IP complaint. And those are the ones that require you to follow that format. That if you want to call it a template, it's here's the root cause. Then you got a paragraph explaining, you know, thank you for letting me know about this situation. Then you've got the root cause itself, where you go into, you know, what caused the issue. Then you got a section that says this is what we've done to fix it, and then you got a section that says this is what we've done to prevent this from happening again.
Awesome, love
then
it. So
you may end up having an additional spot that says other information we'd like you to know. But you want to be super brief. You want to be super straightforward and to the point. And you want to be able to cover everything that they need to know within a page to a page and a half to 2 pages. I like to reference anything that I'm attaching. So any PDF or any additional forms. If they want invoices, typically I like to provide 1 invoice per ASIN. If you've got, you know, 10 invoices or 30 invoices or 30 receipts or whatever for an ASIN, even though you have all those, I think you're better off just trying 1 and make them ask you for more if 1's not good enough.
Okay.
It makes it a lot easier for you to be able to confirm that, yes, they have received this invoice. Yes, they have accepted it. Yes, they have approved it, you know, which is different than whether or not they've accepted the plan of action. I've had plans of action accepted before, but they rejected the invoice. Or I've had invoices accepted, but they rejected the plan of action. So you got to keep that in mind. It's a little bit of a game. It's a little bit of back and forth, but you want to put your best foot forward on that first plan of action, because that kind of starts the dialogue. If it's close enough, they'll give you a little bit of information sometimes that helps you to, you know, take it home and finish properly with all the rest of the information that they might be looking for that you might not be aware of. But it's got to be pretty close to start that back and forth game.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to do your due diligence at the outset when you receive the complaint. Make sure you find that and identify that root cause. Don't waste a plan of action saying we don't know what the problem is, or why we don't know why you called this inauthentic. We buy directly from the manufacturer. You're wasting an attempt when you do that. It counts against you. As far as IP complaints go, I think the fact that they exist and that they're happening all the time is one of the worst things for sellers. I absolutely despise IP complaints.
Yeah.
Because there are more variables beyond your control than almost any other type of complaint, other than like the only thing that I think is worse is a Section 3 type of complaint for code of conduct violation or suspected duplicate account. Those are horrible.
Yeah.
I just about, you know, those are the only thing worse than an IP complaint. And the fact that IP complaints exist in a fraudulent way. It's not just quote unquote legitimate IP complaints, which are in fact, I think, very, very rarely legitimate.
Yes.
But all the other ones where they don't require someone to actually be registered and they don't verify somebody's identity prior to allowing them to file the complaint, which it's wide open for competitors of all types to file complaints against other sellers. And that, I think, it's egregious. I wish there was a way to fix it. And I always plan on a IP complaint when we fight them. It's easily 3 weeks, a lot of the time, maybe 4 weeks, maybe more. The first thing you want to do is attempt to get a retraction from the brand owner. You know, you're reaching out to somebody, and you're essentially, if it's a real brand owner, either the brand itself or a manufacturer or a brand protection firm hired by the brand, whoever it is, you want to reach out to them, and you want to let them know that you've first thing, and this is the first thing I think you should do, whether it's IP complaint or any other type of performance notification. The first thing you should do is close the listing. Don't delete it. A lot of people delete it, and sometimes that's a mistake because after you delete a listing, you can't make any changes to it as easily. And
Yeah,
sometimes the solution to fixing the problem, for instance, things that have done to fix the problem that you address in your plan of action, sometimes the solution is to change something about the listing, which you can do if it's closed, but you can't do if it's deleted. So you would want to let the brand owner know that you have deleted the listing, or I'm sorry, that you've closed the listing, that you're no longer selling it, that you are in compliance, that you've purchased it from an authorized distributor, and that you'd like the ability to be able to sell the product. You know, you're happy to be able to purchase from them directly if they're open to that. But otherwise, you just want to let them know that you're in compliance, that you won't sell it again, and ask them if they'd be willing to remove, you know, to send in a retraction to Amazon.
Yep. And that little note, I think that's super important. And we love that little thing where, like, I would love to sell your product if you can sell directly to me. We've built so many relationships with brands that filed that sort of like beginner IP complaint, or they sent us like the message through customer portal, like, stop selling our stuff. And I went that route, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, here's how to get a wholesale account with us. And then I built relationships that way. So yeah, I love that little nugget right there in the middle.
Yeah. I mean, it really can be an avenue to have a longer or better conversation with somebody. I had some people ask about what happens when you sort of get a pre-IP complaint, when you have a brand or whoever reach out to you and say, send you a letter, maybe through buyer seller messaging, that's either cease and desist, or it's hey, we'd like to know where you got this inventory, and we'd like you to stop selling it, or let us know who you are, or blah blah blah. I had one of those come from a brand directly, and they, you know, said, we noticed that you're selling such and such a product, and we'd like to know where you got it, and we'd like to see your invoice, and we just want to make sure that it's not counterfeit, all that kind of stuff. And I replied to them and never heard back. But I went ahead and made sure that I sold through really quickly. And I knew that I could do that. I knew I could get away with selling it and selling through it really quickly. That's not necessarily the best way for most people to proceed. You don't know how quickly that brand's going to drop the hammer. You don't know how quickly that they're going to proceed with going ahead and filing a complaint. In some ways, people would respond and say, oh, you know, tell them to pound sand. That doesn't mean anything. I have the right to sell this, you know, for sale doctrine, all that kind of stuff. But the fact is, you're at their mercy. In some ways, they're kind of doing you a favor to give you a heads up, instead of going through the process of taking actions to get a IP complaint lodged against you.
Yeah, sometimes even though you can win the battle, it's not a battle you want to be fighting.
You really don't. You really don't. And you know, I'm seeing this more and more for all kinds of ridiculous little things. You know, people who are selling Zeiss products. You know,
actually, one of our members was blocked for Zeiss specifically.
People are selling crock pots, or they're, you know, Q-tips, all kinds of things that you think, oh, you know, it's no big deal. And all of a sudden you've got brand protection agencies saying that you can't sell Q-tips, you know, that you bought at Walmart or Target or whatever. And, you know, it used to be, I would say, hey, you really need to get authorization from the brand to be able to sell the product. But you're never going to get some sort of letter from Clorox that says you can sell Clorox wipes. Or some letter that says you can sell Q-tips, or you're not likely to have a relationship with Johnson & Johnson or whatever. And so if you're RA or OA, it puts you in a little bit of a perilous position in terms of being able to have confidence that you can sell a product because you're not likely to have authorization from the manufacturer. To me, that pushes more and more strategy behind thinking through either private label, contract manufacturing, direct relationships with manufacturers, direct relationships with brands, possibly custom bundles of your own brand with the other brand that you're selling. Those types of strategies, I think, are safer in a lot of ways, especially if you don't have that authorization, because you want to avoid IP complaints. They're such a pain to deal with. There's so many variables beyond your control. You don't know that you're going to be able to get a hold of the manufacturer. You don't know that you're going to be able to get the brand owner to send a retraction. If you do get a hold of them, you want to ask them to send a retraction that includes you being copied on the retraction, so that you have definite notification of that, right? If for some reason Amazon doesn't accept the retraction, which sometimes they don't, you want to at least be able to demonstrate that you got a hold of the person who filed it, and that they agree for you to be able to sell it, or that they're at least in dialogue with you and are willing to remove the retraction. You need proof of that, and the best way to do it is to get a CC'd on that correspondence. When they send the retraction, it needs to be sent from the exact same email address that was used to file the complaint. So that's another real key sticking point. If the original complaint was filed under brand protection at crockpot.com, then it needs to be rescinded from brand protection at crockpot.com. But if you got a hold of so-and-so at Crockpot Corporate, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll be happy to help you out, and they sent it from customer service at crockpot.com, it's not going to get removed.
Interesting.
So that is another reason why it's helpful to have at least documentation.
So do you sort of, like, in your retraction request emails, do you sort of lay out those instructions, like, please respond to this Amazon address, please CC me on that, please use this email address to send it? Do you sort of lay out those instructions?
I would, most of the time, depending upon how familiar somebody is with the process. If they're processing 100 of these a day and they know what's going on, they're like, oh yeah, you're the 5th Amazon guy to call me today, blah, 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 then you probably don't need to supply those instructions. Okay. But for clarification purposes, in other cases, it's, I'd say, well worthwhile to sort of walk them through what needs to happen there.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Another thing I like to, in case everything goes south and doesn't go well, I think it's important for you to document every single attempt that you have when you're contacting that brand owner. Because if you never hear back from them, or if they are, belligerent and is like, I'm not removing that no matter what, you at least want to be able to say, we contacted them through email on this date, we contacted them through email again on this date, we used the communication method that Amazon provided that said that this complainant could be contacted through this method, and we've never received a response. You need to be able to demonstrate very clearly what you've done, that you've done everything you could to try to comply, but can't get a response if you can't get a retraction. Those are important things you may need to use as evidence to be able to get Amazon to remove it. The things that you do next to get the IP complaint removed, it seems like they've definitely changed, and they're kind of in constant flux in some ways. The email addresses that you send to, those have changed. It's no longer notice-dispute at Amazon.com. I think it's now notice-retraction. I can't remember for sure. And then you used to also send it to seller-performance at Amazon.com, but now they want you to use the appeal button. And you used to be able to, do a DMCA counterclaim, and now that's only for a very specific, like I think only copyright. And so there are so many different intricate little parts and pieces to effectively dealing with all the different types of IP complaints, the legitimate ones and the illegitimate ones. It's kind of hard to cover You know,
Yeah.
I can tell you, well, this is generally what we do when you come into the hospital and you're scheduled for brain surgery. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like there are so many different parts of your brain and so
Uh-huh.
many different ways that you might enter those different parts of the brain, and there are different types of surgery techniques, and there, you know, you might use a scalpel, you might use a drill, you might use a saw. It's different every time. So it's kind of hard to blanket all of it to
Mm-hmm.
equip you to be able to do the surgery on the guy in the room for brain surgery that you've never performed before, much less any other type of surgery that you may or may never perform before. And so covering all of it generally is nearly impossible. Like I think I'd probably put together a whole book just to handle IP complaints because they're that varied and
Yeah.
complicated and each one's separate. Um, that being said, I am putting together a book specifically to help sellers be able to address and effectively write a plan of action.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
I think that's an important skill that every seller needs to have, even if you don't actually want to do it yourself. It's like, oh, whenever I get a plan of action, I want to hire somebody,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, I want to put somebody on retainer to deal with these all the time. I'm getting 3 a week or whatever. I still think it's important for you to know what to do and how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
um, even if you're going to hire it out.
Yeah, I agree.
So I hope that answers some of the primary questions about IP complaints. The list of things to do and not do, you know, it's at least a page long of
Uh-huh.
bullet points to have in mind. And so I like to think of it as, let's see what we can do to avoid them. I want to
Uh-huh.
avoid them altogether if possible. You know,
Yeah.
and that's normally my approach with most types of performance notifications. You really do want to determine what the cause was because you really do want to prevent these from happening again. You know, sometimes it's making sure that all of your packaging is on point. You know, the products that you pick up at either, you know, RA, OA, wholesale, doesn't matter. A lot of those products were developed to go on a shelf, and shelf stable packaging isn't necessarily the protective enough to be able to make it all the way from you receiving that product to, you know, shipping it to FBA, to having it go into a warehouse, to
Yeah.
having it sit in a bin, to pick, pack, and ship all the way to the buyer. If any of those steps along the way result in that product being scratched or dented or damaged or crumpled or whatever, Amazon views that as your fault,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, you're responsible, and the buyer is going to complain, and you're going to hear about it, and then you're going to have to figure out, well, why did this not show up in pristine retail condition? So you want to make sure that you have enough margin in that product to be able to include whatever additional packaging is necessary to protect it properly, right?
Okay.
Whether that means one, you might have to pay for bubble wrap, and then two, you've got the step of applying that bubble wrap, and maybe it needs its own protective box beyond just whatever the point of sale packaging was. Any of those things, you've got to keep that in mind, because it's all going to impact your margins. And so if they're thin already, you might want to skip it, especially if
Mm-hmm.
that product is fragile in any way, or, you know, prone to shipping damage. If it's super small, and you know that Amazon's likely to throw that in a poly mailer or a bubble mailer, and that's not going to be enough to protect that product, you know, you're better off to either skip it or package it in some other way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really like what you were saying. How there's sort of like the inauthentic or the used as new and all of those are sort of in a bucket together. And there's, you sort of laid out like a 5.5 or so step. Like you have to, I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head now, but it's like
Yeah,
admit the fault and thank them for telling you and all the other things. And we'll write that out.
sure.
I can have a little thing and put that in the description below this video. So I like that. Now for IP complaints, obviously, yeah, there's like a whole book. It could be a million different things. There's a million different ways to battle it. Are there, and like, I know you said there's a whole book, and this is more like a personal question from Nate to Scott. Something that we've done in the past that I feel like has worked fairly well for us, and maybe you can give me feedback on that, but is to include little things like, for example, let's say I'm selling this mouse, and this mouse is Eastern Times Tech, and there's that listing. I felt like if I were to get an IP claim, anytime that I have gotten that, I've made sure to include that I did not create this listing. I did not take these images. I did not write this copy. I did not add this brand, any of that.
Right.
Do you feel like adding little bits of information such as that are useful in IP claims, or is that just me sort of making myself feel better and doing something that really doesn't
That
matter?
is sort of a standard response that I've seen people have.
Okay.
Um, it may or may not be helpful.
Okay.
You can use buzzwords and throw out, acronyms or phrases that other people have used that have worked, that may or may not be helpful in your
Mm-hmm.
specific complaint situation,
Okay.
because that might not be what Amazon's fishing for.
Mm.
In their situation, they just received a complaint for an IP violation, and it might not have anything to do with that.
Okay. Interesting.
As far
Yeah.
as explaining, I didn't create these things. Amazon gave me the ability to list it. That's not necessarily a good defense.
Okay.
They might not care. In some cases, they might, and
Mm-hmm.
that could be beneficial. It's hard to know which situations it's beneficial.
Yeah.
It To me, it's like, well, I don't like to drive at night, and I don't like to drive at night for several different reasons. One, if you're not looking every single moment, it's easy to run into a deer or a loose cow or, huge tire scraps or whatever. So how do you avoid those situations? Just don't drive at night. You know, um, on a recent trip, I drove halfway across the country, and I took back roads the whole way, stayed off the interstate, and it was a completely different experience. Um, you avoid a whole lot of different road
Mm.
hazards, but you're more likely to run into a closed bridge, and you gotta take a different route. Maybe go 20 miles out of your way because of some closed bridge, but you're still avoiding all the other things like
Mm-hmm.
tire scraps from 18 wheelers. And so it becomes your choice as a seller which things you can control, what things you avoid along the way. Can you make specific decisions? Can you be very strategic about what you do and don't buy and where you purchase it, that is less likely to cause complaints,
Mm-hmm.
less likely to result in IP complaints. One of the things I've seen a lot lately, especially from new sellers, is here is a specific product that I found that's doing well, and it's a Glad sandwich bag listing. So they go to the listing and they think, oh, this is great. I can go source this, and then I'll ship it in and be able to sell against that listing. But what they don't necessarily notice or care about or pay attention to is it's doing really well, but there's really only one other seller on the listing, and the brand name isn't Glad sandwich bags. It shows Glad sandwich bags in the listing, but the brand name is Bill's Bag Emporium.
Yep.
That is a seller who has gone in to create a listing, or they've taken over a listing and tried to make it their own. And it might be for a brand, or it might be unbranded. Let's pretend it was just a generic black bag,
Yeah.
as opposed to a Glad bag that was used for leaves or whatever.
Uh-huh.
You might be able to go find that generic bag, and you might be able to sell the exact same product in the same quantity, the same dimensions, and it matches in every other way. But if somebody's gone in and either created that listing or taken over that listing and named it with their own brand, you should avoid that.
Yep. 100% agree.
It's unfortunate because I feel like, hey, they've violated the terms of service to even create that listing to begin with, or to take it over, because it's not their product.
Yeah.
It's not their product if their brand isn't on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it used to be, if you come across a listing like that maybe somebody sourced from Alibaba or something, and it was quote unquote generic, and they don't have their brand name on it. Well, everybody piled on that listing, but it's a really bad idea anymore. I see that a lot with like consumables. You know, if you went to a specific web store and you found straws, well, you know,
Yes.
you find a listing for straws, and it's like, oh, I can sell against that. But boy, you shouldn't do it if somebody's taken over
Yeah.
that listing, if they've put their brand name on there, even though the straws don't seem to have a brand. You know,
Yeah, like they're
maybe it
doing
truly is
things
generic.
that other sellers doing things they shouldn't be doing. They're already sort of playing dirty, so you should expect that they're going to fight dirty if you try to jump on that same listing because they're already doing it.
Exactly. That is not a good opportunity for you.
Yep.
Now, if you
Yeah.
want to create your own listing with that generic product,
Mm-hmm.
that's perfectly appropriate. But if you want to do it right, you should get trademark for the brand that you're sending it in against,
Mm-hmm.
and you should get brand registry for that trademark, and you should have your brand show up on the packaging or on the product
Mm-hmm.
itself. You can do that. That's still viable, but
Mm-hmm.
you just don't want to list against other people's products,
Yep.
even though it's
Awesome.
not quote unquote theirs. They think it is, and they're going to treat it that way.
Exactly. Yep. Awesome. Well, yeah. So we appreciate you coming out, Scott, and giving it. I mean, that was like an hour of high content. Here's how to not get banned on Amazon, and here's ideas if you do get in trouble. So yeah, we really appreciate that. Again, if people wanna reach out, you're over at ecomsellertools.com.
Yep. ECOM, one M as in Mary.
ECOM. All right. ECOMsellertools.com. Yeah, that's awesome. And what you were saying, like, I think a great solution for a lot of people, if they do start getting themselves into trouble, is like do your own hard work, write your own plan of action. And then if you're kind of not sure about it, then run it by Scott or someone like that, where you can sort of put in a lot of the hard work and get a lot of the grunt work out of the way.
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference, you know. And
Mhm.
if you're encountering those on a regular basis, or you're going to continue to deal with them, and you want to be able to effectively fight them, I'm happy to provide training for you or for your staff to gain the confidence to be able to do it. You might go through 5 or 10 of them before it's like, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. But at least you'll be ready. You maybe be able to fight at least 80% of them on your own without having to get outside help.
Awesome. I love it. So yeah, and then we're going to try and put together some sort of, again, not like a template for you guys to copy and paste, but just sort of the examples we can write out, like, here's what you want in this part. Here's the different things that you'll need to address for something like an inauthentic or a whatever else, just so you guys can sort of visualize what we've been talking about. So we'll try to drop that down in the comments or something like that. But yeah, any last comments or thoughts, Scott?
You got to keep in mind that the terminology that's used, if they say something like inauthentic, they don't necessarily think that what you're selling is counterfeit. There are a whole lot of different things that could result in either Amazon labeling and calling it inauthentic, or the buyer saying that something is inauthentic. They might not truly think that it is, but Amazon sort of leads them down the road of using that as one of their reasons for complaint, because they get free return shipping when they choose that.
Yep, especially during Q4. You'll see that a lot.
So that's something you just have to deal with, but don't lose sight of the real cause of the complaint. In order to effectively address the problem, you have to figure out what caused it, as opposed to focusing on the name that they gave it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot. Focusing on the why. Why did it happen in the first place? Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Scott. We appreciate that. If you guys have other questions, you can drop them down in the comments section. I'll try to tag Scott here, so he might be able to pop over every once in a while and answer a few of those. And I'll try to help with what I can with what little knowledge I have about this. But yeah, we really appreciate it, Scott.
I'll tell you what else. We're offering some specials right now to review accounts for Q4. Every year around this time, I see Amazon starting to purge accounts, where they're just suspending people because your metrics aren't what they need to be. Maybe the ODR problems, maybe there's stuff going on in your account health, and so we can review that with an account health assessment. and that could be particularly beneficial to make
Yeah.
sure that things are going well for you going into Q4. The last thing you want to do is lose your account.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Yeah, I
can
may have to
review
sign up for
that.
that myself. Just make sure
It's
all my ducks are in a row. Everything's good to go.
it's pretty straightforward, and we'll train you. It's not just, hey, we'll take a look at it and tell you, hey, it's, go for it. We'll tell you what to look for.
Okay.
It'll be live, and then we'll go through your account live, and we'll show you where to look and what to look for, and the same things that we're seeing. We want you to be able to see them. You need to be able to monitor and feel confident about what's going on with your account.
Yeah.
So that's under ecomsellertools.com/Q4.
Awesome. All right.
If
And
you
I'll
want to
put
check that
links
out.
to that stuff down in
Okay,
the description in the comments. So
sounds good.
awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Scott. We'll see you, man.
All right. Hey, thank you. Appreciate the time.